Her sister said it the way she said most things. Lightly, almost warmly. The way you say something you have said so many times it no longer registers as something that could land. You were always the pretty one. The man at the bar had just told Nadia. And before Nadia could respond, before she could even decide what she wanted to say, Camille turned from her own conversation 3 feet away and said, "That's so sweet. She was always the funny one. I was always the pretty one." A small laugh. A hand touching his arm. We each had our thing. The man, who had just been looking at Nadia with genuine interest, which was not a look Nadia got often and had not been expecting, glanced at Camille. Something shifted in his expression, the way it does when a person recalibrates who the conversation is actually for. Nadia felt it happen. She had felt it happen her entire life. She picked up her drink. She found a reason to turn slightly, to become slightly less present in that particular cluster of people, the way you learn to do when you have been made slightly less present for 29 years. That was when the man at the other end of the bar leaned over and said, directly to her, loud enough that Camille could hear, "For what it's worth, I completely disagree. If you know what it feels like to be edited out of a room by someone who was supposed to be on your side, stay with me. Because what happened in that bar is the beginning of one of the most satisfying stories you are going to hear today. Like the video right now, and let me tell you everything." Nadia Vance was 29 years old, and she had spent most of those years standing slightly behind her sister in the photographs, and slightly to the side in the conversations, and being, on balance, considered the other one. Camille was 4 years older and had been born with a particular combination of cheekbones and ease and social confidence that caused rooms to organize themselves around her arrival, and she had, from their earliest childhood, understood this as a natural order of things that required no examination. Camille was not intentionally cruel. That was the precise difficulty of it. She did not think of herself as someone who did anything unkind. She thought of herself as honest, direct, sometimes blunt, but fundamentally loving in the way that people are loving when love has always been easy for them and they have never had to learn its careful edges. Nadia had spent years trying to explain the difference between what Camille intended and what Camille did. She had stopped trying 3 years ago. She had settled instead for being present at family events, warm but not close, and for building a life entirely outside the frame her sister had spent decades putting her in. That life was considerable. She had a doctorate in environmental economics from a university whose acceptance alone had required 3 years of work she had done quietly, without announcement, while Camille's engagement and wedding and first apartment had occupied every family conversation in the same period. She consulted for government bodies on climate policy, had spent 2 years working for a UN advisory panel, and had given a talk at a conference in Geneva that had been attended by 11 environment ministers, 3 of whom had requested follow-up materials. She had written a paper that was cited 14 times in the year after its publication and had been described by a reviewer as the most rigorous contribution to the field in 5 years. None of this had ever come up at a family bar night. None of it had been offered, and none of it had been asked for, and Nadia had long since stopped being surprised by that. You learn to carry your own weight without expecting anyone to notice how much it was. Which was where she was now, on a Thursday evening, at Milo's on the corner of Henshaw Street, surrounded by her sister's friends and her sister's husband's friends, and the particular ambient pressure of being in a social environment that had been designed around someone else's gravity. The man who had disagreed was sitting 3 stools down from where the Camille conversation had happened. He was holding a glass of something dark and not looking at his phone, which made him immediately unusual. He had dark hair going slightly gray at the temple, and the specific quality of stillness that some people develop when they have learned to be comfortable with their own company. He was looking at her directly. "I'm sorry?" she said. "I said I completely disagree," he repeated. He was not embarrassed about having said it. He had the ease of someone who doesn't experience retrospective doubt about true statements. "I've been standing here for 20 minutes, and you're the most interesting person in the room, by some distance." She looked at him. "You don't know anything about me. I know you've been introduced to 6 different people in the last 20 minutes, and asked every single one of them a question before talking about yourself. I know you clocked the fire exit as soon as you walked in. And I know you've been carrying your drink without finishing it because you're thinking more than you're drinking." He tilted his head. "I find all of that more interesting than cheekbones." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's a very specific catalog." "I pay attention," he said. She sat down on the stool beside him. Not because of the cheekbones comment. She had had enough of being assessed by her face in either direction. Because of the fire exit. Because he had noticed the fire exit, and that was genuinely an unusual thing to notice. "Nadia Vance," she said. "Rowan Callister," he said. They talked for an hour and a half. Not about her sister. Not about any of the ambient noise of the bar. They talked about the carbon pricing mechanism she had just finished a report on, which he asked about with the focused curiosity of someone who genuinely wanted to understand, rather than someone who wanted to appear interested. They talked about a development project she had consulted on in Nairobi, and why the financing model had nearly collapsed, and what had saved it. He asked questions that were exactly one level more difficult than the previous question, which was the specific quality of a person who is listening and building rather than just waiting. She asked him what he did. He said property development. She said what kind. He said large scale, mostly commercial, some urban regeneration, with the slightly compressed way people describe their work when they are more interested in other people's work than their own. She said there was an interesting tension between urban regeneration and displacement outcomes. The way projects that were meant to revitalize communities often ended up revitalizing them for different people than the ones who had lived there. He said he knew, and something in his voice had the particular quality of a person who means, "I know, because I have been thinking about this for years." Not "I know" as a way of closing the subject. She said, "What are you doing about it?" And he said more than he used to and less than he should, and she said that's honest. And he said he had been told that before. And she believed him. Camille found her at the 90-minute mark. She materialized at Nadia's shoulder with the practiced ease of someone who has a very well-developed instinct for which conversations are generating attention. "There you are," she said. She looked at Rowan. "The assessment was fast and total and invisible to most people. I don't think we've met." "Camille Vance," Nadia said. "My sister." "Camille Pierce now," Camille said. The correction was reflex. She smiled at Rowan. "Are you part of Marcus's work crowd?" "No," he said. "Friend of Nadia's?" "Getting there," he said. He did not move to make it easier for Camille to join the conversation. He did not widen his angle. He did not redirect. He simply stayed exactly where he was, facing Nadia, with the easy confidence of a man who has decided where his attention is and does not feel the need to explain that decision. Camille's smile remained exactly in place. "I'll leave you two to it," she said. She touched Nadia's arm, a brief sisterly touch that contained, Nadia understood, a small proprietary note, and moved back into the room. Nadia watched her go. "She does that everywhere," she said. Not bitterly, just accurately. "I noticed," Rowan said. "Most people don't. Most people are looking at her," he said. "I wasn't." She looked at him. She decided something. Not about him, not yet, but about the evening, about what it was allowed to be. She picked up her drink and finished it. "Tell me about the displacement outcomes problem," she said. Specifically, he told her. She argued with two of his assumptions, and was right about one of them, and he said so without qualification, which was the thing that made her exchange numbers with him at the end of the evening. Not the fire exit. Not the disagreement. That he had been wrong about something, and had said so plainly, and moved on. What she did not know, until 11 days later, when they met for coffee that turned into dinner, that turned into 3 hours of conversation, that she had to physically leave because she had a 6:30 call in the morning, was that Rowan Callister's property development company was not the mid-size commercial firm she had assumed from the way he talked about it. It was Callister Group. She discovered this because she mentioned his name to a colleague who had done some work in urban regeneration, who said, "Wait, Rowan Callister? As in Callister Group?" and looked at her in a way that required explanation. Callister Group had $18 billion in assets under management and had been responsible for 3 of the most significant urban regeneration projects in the country in the last decade, including one that had been internationally recognized, and that Nadia had read a case study about 2 years ago in a paper about community outcome financing models. She had cited that case study in her own work. She looked at the citation for a long time. Then she closed the laptop. Then she opened it again because she needed to read it twice, to be certain she had not misremembered that she had spent 2 years referencing the work of a man who had spent 90 minutes asking her questions about her own analysis of it. She had not misremembered. She called him that evening. "You could have mentioned that," she said when he picked up. A pause. "Mentioned what specifically?" "Callister Group." "The scale." She stopped. "I cited one of your projects in a paper." "I know," he said. "I read your paper 3 years ago when it came out. That's how I recognized your name when you introduced yourself." She sat very still. "You knew who I was. I knew your work," he said. "I didn't know you. Those are different things. I wanted to know which one mattered more to you." She thought about that for a long time. She thought about 90 minutes of conversation in which he had asked questions about carbon pricing and Nairobi and displacement outcomes, and about the fact that he had already read her paper, and about what it meant that he had let her tell him things he already knew because he wanted to hear how she told them. "That's," she said. "Too much?" He said. "No," she said. "It's exactly the right amount." A pause. "But next time, lead with it." "There's a next time," he said. "There's a next time," she said. The next time was a dinner at a place he chose that was not designed to impress, and which she found more impressive for that. Then a walk that was too long for the weather, and neither of them suggested ending. Then a weekend in the city in which they visited a regeneration project he was in the early stages of planning, and she told him 3 things that were wrong with the community consultation model, and he took notes on his phone, which she watched him do, which was among the most attractive things she had ever witnessed. Camille called on a Wednesday 3 weeks after the bar. "Marcus says Rowan Callister was at Milo's the night we were there," she said. Her voice had the particular quality it got when she was performing casualness. "Were you talking to him?" "Yes," Nadia said. A pause. "You didn't mention that. You didn't ask. You didn't ask." Another pause. He's a significant." Camille stopped. Something in the conversation had shifted in a way she was not used to, and was not entirely sure how to navigate. "How do you know him?" "He introduced himself," Nadia said. "At the bar. While you were talking to Marcus's friends." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds, which in Camille's conversational rhythm was equivalent to a much longer silence. "I didn't realize you two were talking," she said finally. Her voice was still pleasant, still composed. But something underneath it had moved, some small, settled certainty that Nadia recognized, because she had watched it operate for 29 years, quietly rearranging itself. "I know," Nadia said, simply, without cruelty. That's sort of the point. She let the silence sit. She did not fill it. She had spent a very long time filling silences that were not hers to fill. Camille said she had to go. They said goodbye warmly because they were sisters. And because Nadia had not stopped loving her, she had only stopped organizing her life around the frame her sister had built for her. The frame, it turned out, had never been load-bearing. 7 months after the bar at Milo's, Nadia stood at the front of a national urban regeneration conference, 240 delegates, 3 government ministers, the most significant annual gathering in her field, and presented a framework for community outcome financing that she had developed over the previous year, partly in conversation with a property developer who kept asking questions that were exactly one level more difficult than the last one, and who had moved his entire community consultation model based on 3 things she had told him on a walk in bad weather. Rowan was in the audience. She knew where he was. She did not look. She presented the work. It was the best talk she had ever given. She knew it while she was giving it. The clarity of someone who has found the room that was always supposed to hold them and has stopped apologizing for taking up the space. When she finished, the room was quiet for a beat. Then it was not quiet at all. Afterward, in the corridor outside the main hall, her colleague Priti, who had been in her field for 15 years and had the specific, rare quality of being genuinely happy for people, found her and said, "Where has that version of you been hiding?" Nadia thought about the bar, the stool, the man who had looked at her with the ease of someone who had already made a decision, the fire exit observation. The disagreement said out loud. "Nowhere," she said. "I was always here. I just stopped standing to the side." 18 months after the bar at Milo's, on a Saturday morning in early spring, Nadia sat at the desk in the study of the house they had bought together and finished the final edit of the policy brief that 2 government departments had jointly commissioned. The most significant piece of work of her career, and the one that would, her colleagues said, be cited for a decade. Rowan brought her coffee without being asked and set it down on the corner of her desk and went back to his own reading without making a moment of it, which was precisely how she liked things done. She looked at the coffee. She looked at the morning light. She thought about the bar. The sister's easy, unthinking sentence. The frame that had always been too small for what she actually was, and the stranger 3 stools down who had looked at her and said out loud with complete composure, "I completely disagree. Some corrections are small and some are everything. Some people wait their whole lives for one honest voice in the right room at the right moment." She had gotten hers on a Thursday night at Milo's on the corner of Henshaw Street, and she had had the sense to sit down and stay. If this story found you somewhere true today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.